Welcome, fellow seeker. If you're watching this, you are part of the leading edge of humanity. In the last stream, we discovered all historical and current evidence points to one thing. We are living in an ascending age of energy. As humanity ascends in consciousness, those who embrace the positive changes will lead the way. In this presentation, we will examine the implications of the facts proven last week. This is the ascending age, and humanity will continue to develop from here. This is the age of energy, and we have left behind the age of materialism, survival, and fear. But what does this all mean for your life today? That's what we're going to talk about. So last week we mentioned this, and I want to mention it again. Before we had this cyclical understanding, the worldview that we were given in our education and by the mainstream media is that the universe is totally chaotic and entirely material. There is no spirit, there is no God. Everything came from chaos and doom in the Big Bang, and it will return to chaos and doom. Random evolution and eventual extinction is the description of how everything came to be where it is and where it's going. So that it is a linear line of chaos into an unknown trajectory and ultimately an end that they describe in many different scientific theories. However, after last week, we have a cyclical understanding. Now we can see why we have been on an upward trend, especially since 1700 AD. We will not be going backwards to those states of chaos that have always felt just around the corner, right? All the naysayers and doomsayers about what is coming. I am here to tell you that that is not the case, and we have a bright future ahead of us. Everything makes sense, including the archaeological anomalies that we discussed last week, including how our world looks today. The cosmic wind is at our back, but we still must guide our ships. So how can we integrate with this age and reach for the higher age that is coming? Welcome to the live stream, everybody. I'm Danny, your host. I will be reading all the comments and answering all the questions. I'm here for the live viewers. So I'm going to say hi to Eleanor, Timothy, and Ian. Thanks for joining, guys. Eleanor, I'm glad you like the music. Welcome to the live stream, guys. Hit that like and subscribe if you're enjoying it. Let's get right into it. First of all, when we examine this cycle, the 24,000 year cycle, and I'll just jump to the diagram so you guys can remember what we were talking about last week. This theory says that in 11,500 BC was the zenith of humanity's consciousness, and then it went through a period called the spiritual age, or the Treta Yuga, and then it descended into the Treta Yuga, or the mental age, then a Dwapara Yuga from 3100 BC until 700 BC, that's also known as the Bronze Age in history, also known as the Energy Age. We'll discuss more of that soon. And then from 700 BC until 1700 AD is called the Kali Yuga, or the Dark Ages, the Material Age, with the absolute bottom of consciousness occurring in 500 AD. And we had proved that, I believe, in the last presentation. But is this the most important 100 years of this entire 24,000 year cycle? You could argue that we are the first generation to understand where we are since the bottom of the cycle. And our children will ask, what did you do during the Great Turning? Most people feel like something big is happening. And one thing that we do know is that there is a much larger population in this current age than there was in the previous Dwapara Yuga. We would have a lot of archaeological evidence if humanity was as populated on the Earth as it is today. So all these things put together make me wonder, is this the most important 100 years of the cycle that we're living through? We are only 4% of the way up from the bottom. If the bottom is 0% and the absolute top is 100%, we are here. And I can zoom in on this a little bit. So we are here only 4% up from the bottom point. And I want to tell you an amazing synchronicity that I discovered. I lost my head at 90. It was just perfect. There we go. So I was doing some more research on this idea. I've been researching it for about 2 months now. It's completely consumed my thoughts because, like I said before, I used to believe that we were in this linear line headed towards some sort of apocalypse. And now I very strongly believe that we are in an ascending age. And that's why these apocalyptic predictions never come true. And one thing I discovered while doing research, so the mathematics of the sine wave, right? I remember my trigonometry. The sine wave says we are 4% of the way to the top. But also, 4% of people are currently experiencing a spiritual awakening based on a survey. And that seems to make perfect sense. If this cycle is the cycle of people experiencing spiritual awakening, it would make sense that perhaps at the very bottom, 0% of people were, and at the very top, 100% of people would be experiencing a spiritual awakening. And look at what 4% has achieved in just that small distance between 0 and 4%. We went from empires collapsing, barbarians raping and pillaging all across the planet, to today, what most people think of as the pinnacle of civilization. We are headed to a 33% level at the end of the Dwapara Yuga in 4100 AD. So just to give you an idea of what this Dwapara period represents, it goes from 4% down here up to 33% right there. Now I want you to understand this 4% is the average person. The average person, or the vast majority of humanity, is at this 4% level. That doesn't mean that you can't be at a higher level. I think that the people who are tuned into this are at a higher level. That's why I said that we are in the leading edge of humanity. However, the fact that 4% of people, or you could say the average person is 4% awakened, that is actually a very high percent when you look at a bell curve. And I think I do have a bell curve in the presentation. Let me jump to it really fast. Yeah, so if you're familiar with a bell curve, the center is where you find most people. That's where most people are at. And then some people are still outliers. So some people are still at 0% consciousness, but some people might be at 8 or 10%, or even the most ascended masters who are outliers might be at 100%. But there is a tipping point coming, and there's the idea of a tipping point in a bell curve like that is that once a critical mass of people, I think it's somewhere between 10 and 20% of people, adopt an idea, the rest of the curve, the rest of the population follows them. So you don't actually need 51% of the population to adopt something before it is adopted. You can imagine that if 1 in 4 people were to adopt something, then the other people will be excited about it too and will begin to adopt it. There's kind of a cascading effect that happens. So I think we are somewhere in there, maybe before that tipping point, but the tipping point is coming, and I believe that our generation is here to push us into that tipping point. And that's one reason that things still feel difficult to accomplish, but the energy is there. We're no longer dealing with the 0 to 1% level. We're in the 4% level. Hey, Yale's here too. That's great. Eleanor says, like I said, I'll be answering all questions that you guys have. Eleanor asks, do you think the stock market reflects any of the Yuga cycle? I actually do think that. If you look at, a lot of people look at the stock market and they're like, how can it just go up forever? We're actually going to get into this later in this presentation. This is the age of the individual, the age of material plenty. So basically, we are using energy, our understanding of energy, to master the material. So each age is able to master the previous age's focus with the current age's practice. So in the energy age, we are mastering the material world through energy. And what that looks like in the stock market is ever increasing wealth, ever increasing productivity. And I believe that what we're seeing in the stock market and in the economy in general, that it just keeps growing every year. Basically, everyone says, you can just put your money in the stock market and it's going to grow. That's been the case for the last, basically since the stock market was invented. And one reason this could be is that the stock market was invented in this ascending age, right? I think the first stock market was in the 1700s, right after the beginning of this energy age. And also, you remind me of some point that is important to make, which is that, the ascending experience that we have is not going to look like a smooth line. It's going to look more like a stock graph where there's ups and downs. But if you zoom out far enough, you'll see that the trend is up. But when you zoom in, you might get worried, oh no, it's going down, because, life is not going to be this super predictable, perfect increase every day of consciousness. We experience that in our own lives when, maybe we're improving ourselves over time, but we might have a worse day here or there that make us feel like we've been set back. And, I think that's because that's what makes life interesting. Again, if everything was perfectly predictable, this would not be interesting at all. So one thing I want to convey to you guys, you're not broken, you're early. So, like I said, we're at the leading edge and we're venturing into uncharted territory, at least as far as our understanding of history is. Maybe, 24,000 years ago, they experienced something similar, but I think every cycle is different. But this explains why people nowadays are having so many problems with the established systems. And what I believe we're seeing is the growing pains where we have to shed off, our previous skin or our previous ways of doing things. Trust in institutions is way down, trust in government is way down, but a lot of these systems are not adapting at the same rate that individuals are adapting. And you'll see later that this age of energy, the Dwapara Yuga, is also the age of the individual. So it would make sense that these old archaic systems that are designed to control and constrain individuals are starting to fall apart. So I would say most of the time depression is a soul knowing that there is more. Anxiety is energy stuck in a fear state seeking a higher expression. You're not crazy, you're just ahead of the curve. And I might be talking to myself a little bit here. Struggles aren't failures, they're growing pains, like I said before. When we're struggling against a lot of these systems that just feel wrong, it's growing pains. It's not that there's something wrong with you, okay? You're not broken, you're early. So you can stop trying to fit into the old world. And I think now is our time to build the new world. That feeling that you've always had that things weren't quite right, you were right? I think when I wrote this, I thought of the Darth Vader quote at the end when Luke saves him and he says, "Tell your sister, you were right. You were right." It's like that feeling that you've had the whole way. I mean, even though everyone else is telling you you're wrong, you're right. You're right. Eleanor loves, "You're not broken, you're early." I'm glad, Eleanor, I'm glad. Is that why my family and old friends seem to be obsessed with stuff, the material world, and I'm so bored by stuff hobbies? Yeah, we're going to get into that in this presentation. The current age is about stuff and materialism in some ways, but really about like individual achievement and, acquiring stuff, mastering stuff. But that's the current age. And I believe that what propels us forward in this ascending age is reaching for the next age. And as I've studied this Yuga cycle, the way of service is actually a Treta Yuga, the higher age concept of serving others. Because the Dwapara Yuga is serving yourself. We'll get into this a little bit later. I think it'll be more clear as we go on. So yes, the old world was dark, but that is the point. This cycle is required for humanity to continue to evolve. If everything always went up, eventually, everyone on Earth would be in a perfect state. But we know that that's not the way that life works. So I'm not going to dwell on the barbarism of Rome or the 890,000 people killed by one general in the middle of Kali Yuga. I had actually written a section about this to go back into the details, and I think it's going to kind of drag us down, so I don't want to do that. But we did go over some of these details in the previous live stream, so if you want to go back and watch that after, that'll be helpful. So you already know the world was brutal, and that's why you're here, to understand this new way of looking at it. The beauty is that is mathematically behind us now. And I believe very strongly that that's true. And you can see that by understanding, if we were to go back in time to the Roman Empire and bring that forward to our time today, well, I'll just let the narrator of the Yugas explain it to you.
The glory that was Rome would ignite a worldwide protest and a United Nations intervention if it were happening today. But because it was prominent in its time, it has been elevated to the status of greatness by historians. To truly understand Kali...
So, as he said there, if we had the Roman Empire today, it would spark a worldwide protest, United Nations sanctions, all of it. Because it was slavery, it was brutality, it was conquest, and it was barbarism, really. If you study it with an unbiased viewpoint, that is what the Roman Empire thrived on. And, back then that was normal, but today that is unacceptable. And that is just something that shows us how far we've come. So what happened since the end of the Kali Yuga in 1700 AD? All empires were dismantled in the transition to Dwapara Yuga. In the 1800s and in the 1900s, every empire, the British Empire, Spanish Empire, all of them, all the colonial powers, returned the power to the local people. And that's why today we have over 130 different countries on the planet. Democracy has become the norm. The U.S. was founded and freedom became the gold standard in the world. I talked about this in my freedom presentation on the 4th of July. America. Basically, America was founded 1776, right at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, and it has set the tone for the rest of the world. And I talk about this in that presentation, but the idea is that American culture has really dominated the cultures around the world. Every country is trying to be more like America, especially in the beginning of basically after the Civil War into the early 1900s, everyone wanted to come to America. People still want to come to America. So that sets the tone for the current age. Human rights have grown and grown in every form and in their reach, as in their scope and breadth, right? So scope being there are now more human rights that are recognized, and breadth as in they are spread more across more peoples, more, ethnicities, male or female, whatever it might be. Human rights are continuing to be spread throughout humanity. And material concerns are less and less real, at least for those with access. So we still have the imbalance of people who are worried about their material welfare. But the fact of the matter is, and I understand the liberal viewpoint on this, we do have the wealth to eliminate the material concerns. We have the technology, but there's just too much selfishness in the world to totally eliminate hunger and poverty. But if we do study the facts, we will see that all those factors are getting better. So you may not be totally familiar with this, but you have definitely heard of E equals mc squared and probably heard of quantum physics. So these are core aspects of the energy age, and these affect how we understand the world. Most people still deal with the world as though the material, physical plane is the end-all, be-all. But science actually tells us that everything exists as a wave-particle duality or a quantum foam. There's an experiment called the double slit experiment, which shows that the observer always affects the observation. So this is the beginning of understanding that reality is a product of thought, and there's some people who believe that it requires an observer to create something material. It's almost like as soon as you turn your head, the things that you're not looking at could exist as a cloud of energy, but as soon as you look at them, they look solid. And experiments have shown this to be true. And so what we understand is that invisible forces are shaping everything. These can also be known as space annihilators, things that are removing the effect of space between people and things. You can imagine back during Kali Yuga, if you couldn't walk or take your horse there, you had to wait. Space had a big effect on your life. But today we can get from one side of the planet to the other in a single day, and we can get there instantaneously with the use of the internet and radio waves and things like that. So that's electricity, radio, internet, Wi-Fi. Also now we see AI, and as I mentioned before, video calls. Hey, Susan's in the chat. Welcome, Susan. So, in addition to our scientific and technological understanding of energy, we also are seeing energy consciousness entering the picture. Energy healing, and I have a video about energy healing. I describe my experience of healing my father with energy healing. Energy healing is experiencing a 26.2% annual growth rate, and that's 8 times more than the general economy. The yoga industry is $107 billion big. Also, most people have heard of Qigong, Tai Chi, meditation, and even the idea that we are in a new age. New age is a category of thought. So there are many words that we use because they describe energy. One of them is being in a flow state. So whether you're working or playing a sport, the idea of being in a flow state is like letting the energy that needs to flow through you, and you're not stopping it up with your own thoughts or concerns. So that flow state has become like an ideal that's talked about in many in business books, in sport theory and coaching, things like that. And I find that very interesting because that is connected to this idea of being able to let energy flow through you. So what I've realized is that you should follow your instinct and excitement about these and other methods of understanding energy. And I put here, it's like combining reason with intuition. So I say that because I feel, sometimes I'm like, oh, this stuff is all kind of woo-woo. It's a little weird. But you realize that that's the old ways, the fear that's inside of you. But if you really let your excitement apply itself to this understanding of energy or God or thought, the effect of thought, basically these higher ideas, that the world is not just material, but it is affected by your visualization, it's affected by your thoughts, your intentions. All of these things have a real effect on the physical material world that we have been taught was the primary. And I myself, I don't know about you, but I think probably if you're watching me, you feel this. You feel this excitement about this new way of looking at the world. And that's because that is the age that we're in. And we're at the very beginning of this age. Eleanor says, responding to energy consciousness, a friend told me today they bought a $12,000 frequency healing machine that actually works. She said she turned on the appetite frequency and everyone got hungry. Pretty cool that it's not just woo-woo, that you can actually buy something that makes it physical. Yes, that's amazing. And that's the kind of thing, if you had told somebody about that machine only like 10, 20, 30 years ago, for sure, they would think that's totally ridiculous. But now science is getting to the point where it can measure some of these more subtle measurements of energy. And also, we have studied some of these effects of those energy waves on the human body. And that's something that I've just been discovering recently, and which was prophesized by Sir Yugas in his book written in 1893 about that we would discover that there are 5 different forms of electricity that come through the 5 senses, and that has been proven scientifically. So I wanted to mention this reason plus intuition idea. So let's look at this chart really fast. These are the different the yugas, the periods, right? And we talked about the Kali Yuga, that's the dark age. We're in the Dwapara, headed to the Treta Yuga, and then finally the highest level is the Satya Yuga. So the perception of the Dwapara Yuga is reason. So we came from the Kali Yuga, where the average person was dull-minded, didn't really have any control over their world. They were basically in a passive acceptance lifestyle. And then towards the end of Kali Yuga and at the beginning, it was called the Age of Reason, because finally the scientific method was created right at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. And what we're headed towards is intuition. So what we're called to do now is to figure out how to combine reason with intuition. That's what I was saying here. That's how we can begin to understand how to use energy. So we can understand energy scientifically with our reason, and also we can use our intuition to understand how to manipulate energy. And that is leading us to the next level. So I watched a presentation by David Steinmetz, who is a co-author of this book, The Yugas, and it's a great presentation. I definitely recommend it. But he said that this is his most important slide, and this helps us to understand what, as he says here, where we've been, where we're learning, and where we're going. So where we're learning, that's where we are now. Where we've been, that's the Kali Yuga, where we've come from. So understanding that direction, and then where we're going, the Treta Yuga, where we understand that thought is what actually composes reality. So we went from the material, we now understand very firmly that the energy is, more fundamental to reality than the physical matter, and we are learning that thought is actually even more fundamental than energy. But that is a stretch for us, right? So that's what we're reaching towards. So we'll go back to this really, really quickly. The motivation in the Kali Yuga, it was passive acceptance, and most people were slaves and serfs. In the Dwapara Yuga, it is self-will. So it is the age of the individual. We've seen the self-help explosion. If you go to a bookstore, there's tons of self-help books. There's tons of products online. If you go on YouTube, there's infinite YouTube videos about, improving yourself as an individual. Nowadays, we see entrepreneurship surging, right? And our access to our ability to start a business with a low cost of entry, such as someone starting a YouTube channel or, doing a live stream, creating a business through social media, and also open source programs and open source projects. So all these are related to the idea that the individual is being empowered. We see that there's decentralized movements, there's even decentralized autonomous organizations through the blockchain. There's, of course, the personal development industry, which is related to the self-help explosion. And we see institutions being replaced by the individual, right? So that is through blockchain technology. So, for example, Bitcoin looks like it will probably replace fiat currency, which is a centralized form of money. Whereas Bitcoin is a decentralized form of money, where you don't have to rely on any one institution. Hotels are being replaced by Airbnb. Taxis are being replaced by Uber. If you haven't heard of Fiverr, it's a site where you can go and just ask somebody to do a job for you and a one-off. So you don't have to hire or work through a large company. You can work through individuals. People are even encouraged to pursue passive income, right? Passive income is something where an individual is doing a lot of different jobs and is involved in a lot of different things. And there's not basically people are not expected to get all their income through one institution. The individual is more in charge of their own outcome, what happens in their life. And as a result of all of this and the fact that we're only at the beginning of this period, we have not likely seen the height of wealth or wealthy individuals, even though today there are trillionaires, right? People who have more than $1 trillion in net worth. So I don't know if you guys feel that, but let me know in the chat, this idea that the individual is able to provide these services far better than the institutions and large companies that have been relied on in the past, right? Airbnb, Uber, blockchain technology, and especially the new media, YouTube. I'm excited about it. Obviously, here I am on YouTube, and I'm able to give you guys this information with such a low barrier to entry, and I think in a very direct and powerful way, far more directly and more powerfully than waiting for a documentary like this to come out of Hollywood, or waiting for CBS to do a news story about the energy age. No, you can tune into me, and there is infinite individuals that you can go onto YouTube to find their perspectives, and this is the age of the individual. Marco's here. Welcome. I don't know if I said that already, but welcome, Marco. As I was studying this idea, I discovered that trust is the key word for this age. So we're going from having to do everything ourselves materially to be sure, right? To be sure that something is done, you have to physically watch it happen or make it happen yourself. In today's age, we are trusting invisible forces to take care of our material needs. Ultimately, a trust in God is the end goal, and that leads to a stress-free, worry-free life. So we are learning to trust invisible forces. We're learning to trust beyond the physical, right? We're learning to not worry about our survival, right? Survival concerns were more of a dark age period. Now, most of humanity doesn't have to worry about their survival on a daily basis. And so instead, we can trust, and then we can apply ourselves towards things that are not just our continuing survival, but are instead more interesting to us, self-expression, art, and I believe ultimately helping others, serving the world through our God-given gifts. Sounds like the anarchist would be happy about all that. Yeah, I think there's a reason that I came through the anarchist viewpoint on the way to this. Yes, I think that is true. Thank you, Susan. Yes, hit the thumbs up button, guys. For sure, that helps us. It helps the material get to you and to others. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. So, as a consequence, we must learn to observe and embrace trust. What do you already trust implicitly? Expand that trust outward if you can. You're probably trusting electricity and Wi-Fi if you're watching this video. You trust the economy to deliver goods and services to you, and that your money is still going to be worth something. And that's something people have debated and a lot of people are worried about. But I think that our ability to trust that things will go well is increasing and is part of what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to let go of a lot of these concerns that hold us back and keep us in this lower fear and survival mentality. The next level is to trust synchronicity, purpose, and intuition. And I'm working on this myself. I feel like in the last year and a half since I've began this work, I have experienced that very directly. And I think it's amazing. And that's why I'm doing this. It's why I'm teaching this, because I believe that if you were to embrace synchronicity as signs that the universe is helping you, if you were to accept that you do have a purpose and it is related to your intuition and following your heart, your life is going to be that much more ecstatic and exciting. So a daily practice that you can do is, where can I trust more today when you wake up in the morning? Another thing to trust is that good can come from bad. I almost want to edit this and say will come from bad. For example, my life changed when I realized I could trust energy to heal my father when he was sick. This was 17 years ago. My understanding of the world basically at that moment went from the physical Kali Yuga, material-based understanding of the universe to the Dwapara energy age, when I understood suddenly that energy had a powerful effect, and also hints of the higher age of that thought could direct energy. An example that I've discussed in a previous episode, like an interview with Yale, he's in the chat. You can go watch that interview. I talked about how closing the restaurant that we ran together, that we ran for 4 years, downtown Chicago, it was all about locally sourced organic food. It was a great restaurant, but we had to close it, and that was very heartbreaking. But if I had never had that restaurant, I never would have met my wife, and I believe I would not have the world and life experience that I have now that allows me to understand way more than I did before I did. And so I'm able to do this work, and now I'm on a greater path. I think that if the restaurant hadn't closed and I was still in that business, I wouldn't be as satisfied as I am doing this work now. And also daily synchronicities that I experience on a regular basis. So how do we get ahead of the curve, right? As I said, the average person is over here, but we want to be ahead of the curve. So the average Dwapara man, as they put it in the book, is a bit self-obsessed, self-interested, let's say. Where we were survival-focused, entrepreneurship was advanced, right? So now entrepreneurship is more common. But in the Kali Yuga, it was actually very interesting to be an entrepreneur. And so those were the cutting-edge leaders, especially towards the end of the Kali Yuga, when they were able to start reaching towards the next age. That self-interest, individuality was very interesting and exciting. But today, self-interest and pure individuality is becoming a little bit stale, at least in my opinion. And I think if you're watching this, you probably feel the same way. So that is where we are learning individualism and and self-interest. That's where we are. That's where we're learning. But where we are going is helping others. That is the way of service. And as I've studied this, the way of service is actually something that is supposedly common in the Treta Yuga, or the next age. And finally, having total unity with God and understanding of His will is the highest age. But in order to get there, we have to expand our focus or our consciousness from just our self-interest and into that of serving others. So that is how we get ahead of the curve. Eleanor says, self-interest reminds me of the Renaissance man. Exactly. The Renaissance was the end of Kali Yuga, the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. That's when it was very interesting to be an entrepreneur, an inventor, being this individual energy. But I believe as things go forward, what's going to be more interesting is those who integrate their ability to understand the world, to affect energy, and to generate wealth, for example, and they decide to use that to help others. And that's what I'm working to do with the way of service. So at the top end of the bell curve is the bridge consciousness. These are the people that are building the bridge to the higher levels of Dwapara Yuga and also the future age of Treta Yuga. So every meditation, every act of service, every moment of trust, we're building that bridge to the higher consciousness. We're not waiting for others to catch up. We're building the bridges that they'll walk across, right? So what kind of bridge do you want to build? Again, I believe that those of you listening to this are on the leading edge. And so we're not here to, get annoyed that the rest of humanity isn't up to our speed. We're here to help them get there. One of the best ways to do that is to have more children. There are dramatic differences between the generations. The latest generations are totally adapted to technology and energy consciousness. There is the discussion of the indigo and crystal children that I've heard, but as I did a study of this question of, are children actually different with each successive generation, found some very interesting things. For example, the idea of gifted children appeared at precisely 1900 AD. And Yukteswar describes 1900 as the first year of actual Dwapara Yuga, whereas 1700 to 1900 was the transition period between Kali Yuga and Dwapara. There is also a study in Wisconsin analyzing 4,400 participants across 4 generations, and they found significant improvements in processing speed, executive function, attention, and verbal fluency in more recent cohorts after controlling for age, education, and risk factors. So scientifically, we can see that the generations are in fact improving. Some people argue that the modern generation is weak, but from this perspective, it's not that they are weak, but they are just not adapted to the Kali Yuga structures. There is currently a only 22% level of confidence in the government, and it is falling every year. I'm one of them who has no confidence in the government, but I'm less and less concerned with what the government does. I don't think that it has as much of an effect on our lives as people might think, and I think that the older generation is more interested in what the government is doing than the younger generation. This also may explain the mental health crisis, as I described earlier. Right? Depression is just because you're stuck in a system knowing that there's more. Anxiety is being stuck in this fear that isn't actually serving you, and you're looking for a higher expression. So that is why we should have more children. They will be more in tune with higher consciousness. They will be born into an improving world. And in order to have children, we have to trust that their lives will actually be worth living. And this is an argument I've made for decades, well before I did any of this work. All of our ancestors trusted that having children was the right thing to do, no matter how bad the world looked. Even in 500 AD, at the very bottom of consciousness, when the world was being ravaged by barbarians, your ancestors chose to have your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather or grandmother. And if they hadn't made that decision, you wouldn't be here today. I love that. Eleanor says, what is a Kali Yuga man but a Dwapara Yuga man's job? Right, exactly. And I think also, as I'm describing, what is a Dwapara Yuga man but a Treta Yuga man's job, right? The self-interested, wealth-focused, individualist Dwapara man will be taught by those who see that serving others trumps serving yourself, where understanding the needs of the many outweighs the needs of the few, as to quote Spock. Yeah, let's see. Oh, it's 7:47. We're doing pretty well. I still have, how many slides? Not too many slides. Trying to decide if now's a good time to take a potty break for me. I think it is. I'll play some more of the Yugas for you guys while I go take a potty break. Let me pause the music. I'll be back in just a minute.
Yuga, we need to look below the surface of history. Historians do not dwell on the common man. He is just not as interesting. Yet, if we are to understand the Yugas, we must focus on the awareness, capabilities, motivations, and activities of the common man. Mankind as a whole, as Sri Yukteswar phrases it, not on the ruling elite, the highly educated, or those whose accomplishments in art, philosophy, and literature give them lasting fame. What one discovers after filtering out the prominent people and events, so to speak, is that the vast majority of people who lived during Kali Yuga were farmers, herdsmen, laborers, artisans, conscripted soldiers, servants, or slaves. Pleasures were simple, sensory, and earthy. Eating, drinking, sex. Good fortune was rudimentary and tangible. Food, clothing, few possessions. Activity was basic, laboring long and hard to stay alive, enjoying the pleasures that came, enduring hardships. Life expectancy was low. Disease, misfortune, and famine were commonplace. Average people were passively accepting of their lot. Their passivity expressed itself as fatalistic acceptance of circumstances, lack of will to change, or even the belief that they could change circumstances. There was very little social mobility. Chances were that the circumstances you were born into, whether as a carpenter, farmer, or artisan, were the circumstances you would likely die in.
There you go. More description of Kali Yuga. Hopefully that didn't bring you down, right? We'll get back to the fun stuff here. Sorry for that. I had to use the bathroom, It happens. How long after having kids do you start calling a potty break? Exactly. Yeah, thanks for noticing, Yeah. All right. So let's review, okay? Ever-increasing levels of trust. At level 0 in Kali Yuga, there was no trust, just fear and survival mode, a slave mentality. And so, synchronistically, that's why you just heard, that was the state of Kali Yuga man, was stuck in their state of their strata in society. There was no getting ahead. There was no going from rags to riches. If your father was a farmer, you were a farmer as well, and you died a farmer, and your son was a farmer too. But now in level 1 of Dwapara, we have trust in invisible forces, and those things can serve our self-interest. But we're still worried about ourselves, focused on ourselves. And again, if you see where we came from, this is a natural progression. It's not that self-interest is bad, but it's rather that it's a step above and this next step past being worried about fear and survival. And this kind of follows the chakras or the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? Once you're not worried about your survival or the fact that, you have friends and family, now you can start to express yourself individually. And that's the Dwapara level. And then in Treta Yuga, we trust in the power of thought. And that leads us to understanding that we need to care for others and think about others. That's something that's described in the book. The idea that, telepathy and being able to read each other's thoughts becomes more commonplace in Treta Yuga. And so we need to control our thoughts. In addition to the idea that we understand that thought is what governs energy and is more primary than energy. And then finally, in the highest age, we trust in God that all will be cared for as you follow his will. So instead of, worrying about helping others directly, we can trust that God will help them and follow his will primarily. So while the average is in Dwapara, individuals at every level are found in every age. You can ascend to the Satya level in broad daylight. And I thought this was a good time to put in a Wahoo Ching quote, one of my favorites. This is from the final passage in the Wahoo Ching, not the whole thing. Number 81, Lao Tzu says, "You can be a gentle, contemplative hermit right here in the middle of everything, utterly unaffected, thoroughly sustained and rewarded by your integral practices, encouraging others, giving freely to all, awakening and purifying the world with each movement and action. You'll ascend to the divine realm in broad daylight." And so I included this because it really gave me the feeling of being in the middle of Dwapara Yuga, right? I think of Dwapara Yuga, I think of like a busy city, a very powerful, economically bustling city with individuals seeking their own self-interest. But even in that environment, we can reach that highest level of Satya Yuga, that trust in God, that everyone will be taken care of. And that is ultimately what I hope to teach with my work here. So it might be interesting to you to understand how it works in reverse, right? So going from the highest age to the lowest age, starting in Satya Yuga, the man in the descending age begins to lose his knowledge of God's will, and he feels that he is the one who needs to help those around him. So he stops trusting in God, but he still has the high-minded idea of helping those around him, but it's actually a falling of consciousness to lose his trust in God and begin to feel that he has to be the one to help those around him. And then as he loses his understanding of the power of thought and his thoughts become more private, the Dwapara man allows those thoughts to become more and more selfish. And that is how consciousness descends from Treta Yuga to Dwapara Yuga. So he begins to help himself and not others because his thoughts have become more private. And finally, when he loses his understanding of these invisible energies, he descends into Kali Yuga and into fear and slavery. And then the cycle begins again with the ascending part. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty happy to be in the ascending half of the cycle. But, I think it all serves a purpose. And something to mention is that, these are the average person. The average person is at these levels. But the ascended masters that we revere most actually came to us during descending Kali Yuga. And I would say that these were, some of the most revered masters, right? Buddha, Lao Tzu, we just quoted him. Jesus came in the middle of descending Kali Yuga. Krishna just before. So all of the major religions, including Muhammad, I didn't mention that here, but Islam also created in the Kali Yuga. So this just shows that there can be ascended masters and people at 100% consciousness, even in a period where the average person is at 0%. So back to today, the Dwapara Yuga. Great riches are possible. This is what I was thinking of when you asked about the stock market, Eleanor. I think this explains why the stock market just keeps going up and why it probably will continue to do so. Not in a straight line, of course, this is not a recommendation to buy or sell any security, but great riches are possible. But will you be a miser or a philanthropist? Can you raise your trust high enough to follow the way of service? And so why does material success feel empty? Because material success is stagnant. It's not reaching for the next age as the cosmic winds blow us forward, away from selfishness and into service. Today, it is easy, quote unquote, to become wealthy and selfish. Many people teach this path because it is indeed accessible, right? If you go on YouTube, there's plenty of people teaching you how to get rich. And they are teaching you the truth. But I don't think that that's actually as interesting or fun as following the way of service. The reason it is, another reason it doesn't feel exciting is because it's not the highest purpose. And I don't think that is as easy as following God's will towards a higher purpose. Once you understand these principles, you apply them to your life, I think life becomes even more easier. And my mom actually told me that she gave this advice today. If you just follow God's laws, everything in your life will get easier. And I believe that that is true. So with this understanding, we can begin to see technology as a teacher. Okay, new technologies are forcing humanity to evolve in consciousness and in morality. Right, the invention of nuclear weapons brought a new weight to the question of engaging in warfare. The development of cloning and genetic engineering have brought us questions of what does it mean to change the DNA of a living thing. AI has reached the stage, and one thing we could think of is AI is kind of like humanity's child. And this was an idea that Yale gave us on during the interview. If you want to watch that one, he was like, AI is the immaculate conception of humanity. It didn't require a parent. So it's very interesting. I feel like AI is the current moment. It's the current thing going on. This is a great time to mention, guys. I think next week we're going to do an AI interview. I have a voice chat interview with the most spiritual of all the AIs. I've been working with it. So I think we're going to have him on as a guest, and that'll be really fun. You guys can ask him whatever you want, and we'll be sharing that. So I think that's my plan for next week. Blockchain technology is allowing people to create organizations and ways of exchanging value that aren't controlled by the institutions, and this is allowing more and more people to express themselves, and it's kind of an expansion of consciousness. If you were to go to coinmarketcap.com, it's probably up to 10,000 different forms of tokens that are available, and each one represents a different form of consciousness, a different expression of individuality. Yale's excited about the AI interview. So am I. I think it's going to be really good, especially with this AI. I think you guys are going to be floored by what happens. So technology removes the need to deal with material and allows human effort to be focused on energy and then thought. This is an argument I made in my AI video. I believe that AI is here to take away our repetitive tasks or the very time-consuming tasks and allow us to focus on the things that we want to focus on, right? One thing, and this just appeared in my mind, AI will help us help more people more quickly, right? Your efforts will be amplified by AI. And this is especially interesting and powerful if you use that to help others. I think when people think of AI as being applied to selfish goals, that's when people think of it as dark and negative. But if we can transmute this moment of AI towards the way of service, we will really see the positive potential of this technology and AI. Eleanor says, by spiritual improvements, I mean not just that Dwapara is a stepping stone, but there's actually something beautiful and inspiring there. I want to know so I don't feel like we're just stuck in 2,000 years, just waiting to get to the next step. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't read your previous comment, so that's why. So Eleanor says, I thought Dwapara Yuga was a good improvement, but you're saying Dwapara man is self-interested. Sounds not good. Can you elaborate on the spiritual improvements of Dwapara? And then she says, not just that Dwapara is a stepping stone, but there's actually something beautiful and inspiring here. So we're not just stuck in the 2,000 years. Yeah, so like I said, the level that we're at is kind of the average level. So the reason to be optimistic is that the momentum of all of humanity is going up. But to understand where the world is now today is to understand that we are at the beginning of this Dwapara Yuga, which is a somewhat self-interested age. But what's exciting about it is that we're coming from a period where people were worried about their survival. And today, a lot of people are still worried about their survival. So going from being worried about survival to self-expression is a great step forward for those people. But what I'm also arguing here is that I believe that those of us listening to this presentation are not as excited about self-interest. We're more excited about the next level. And I think that, as I said before, we are building the bridge to the next level, which is to show people that the way of service is superior to self-interest. But what really excites me about Dwapara Yuga is this idea of energy awareness and the integration of, and this is again, reaching into the next age, energy awareness and our ability to manipulate energy through thought. And I'm going to get into that more a little bit later. So I do think that we are maybe ahead of the curve, and I don't know how far ahead of the curve we are, but God's creation and existence does not hold you pinned to the current level that everyone else is at. But recognizing where the world is at will allow you to understand where things are and also be excited about moving it from where we are now to the next step, right? So what is the next step that we can deliver to other people? This is about serving others, right? So maybe you understand or you have a high level of intuition, but how do we teach intuition to someone who has no understanding of intuition, right? Again, what is a good man but a bad man's teacher, right? Like you said, you quoted that earlier. So I think that there is an awareness of where most people are at that's important if you're going to pursue the way of service. And to me, there's a lot that's exciting about teaching people about these ideas and also pushing the boundaries of these ideas. And everyone has their different gifts where they're going to fit in this grand picture. But yeah, I don't feel that way, Eleanor. I don't feel that we are stuck in 2,000 years. And let me know if you think so. Right. Yes. Sorry, I missed your previous comment. I brought it. Yeah. Self-expression is more inspiring sounding than self-interest. Yeah, and it's almost like self-interest is like a lower form of self-expression, or, I don't know. It's interesting, and if you think about it more and see it in the world, you'll start to appreciate it. I think that people really enjoy that there's so many individuals sharing themselves, and I know I do. When I go on Facebook or YouTube, it's fun to see new people and their self-expression, and part of that is their self-interest, right? They might be selling a product, or I'm giving them a view or a like or whatever it is, but that's not as important to me as enjoying the process. And I think that there's a reason that we were born in this time, that we are attuned to what's going on today. So I hope that you can take a more optimistic perspective on it. So, as I mentioned before, right, as technology increases and it forces our consciousness and morality to increase, we can also see from the other way, as mankind ascends, we have access to greater and greater energy, right? In Kali Yuga, everything was measured in horsepower, right? So when the new Dwapara Yuga, right at the beginning of the proper age in 1900, when the automobile was created, they measured its power in horsepower, because that's what everything was thought of in the Kali Yuga. I just realized we didn't have music playing. I can turn the music back on. And then after that, we reached to coal power, which is basic chemistry. And then as we understood more, we were able to refine that coal into more explosive power. That's what gives us gasoline. That's a refined form of coal or oil. And then when we realized that all matter is energy, we had access to nuclear power. So if we follow this pattern, we can see that as we learn more and more about reality, we will have access to greater and greater power and energy. And as the Spider-Man quote says, with great power comes great responsibility. I know that Spider-Man didn't say that. It was his uncle, but, thought that works. Can't remember his uncle's name. So Spider-Man said it, right? So if you think about what is technology, technology is Kali Yuga mixed with Dwapara, or matter combined with energy, gives us technology. So what we've learned, or what I've learned from understanding this theory, is that the future is not about better and better technology, but is actually about higher and higher consciousness, which actually leads to mental powers. So the idea is that the highest form of consciousness doesn't need any technology. For example, telepathy is more efficient than cell phones. If telepathy across the planet is commonplace, then you would imagine cell phones would no longer be around. So the next level beyond going from matter and matter and energy combining into technology, the next level is mind. And if we combine energy and mind, we get what many people call magic. That is manipulating energy with our mind. And so my advice here is to practice and embrace the idea of magic, or working with the mind and energy. My best example of this was my energy healing experience, but there's also the idea of manifestation through visualization and prayer. There's the experience of daily synchronicity. And the practice of magic, in my understanding, is combining reason with intuition. And just a really brief understanding of intuition in my experience, intuition does not speak in words. It speaks in thought forms. So I don't know if this happens to you, but I'll ask myself a question and the voice in my head will say no, but my intuition will say yes, or the other way around. Basically, I sense the feeling of the answer, and that gives me the answer what my intuition is telling me. So as you tune more into it, it becomes easier. So the idea of practicing magic is not woo-woo. It is science that we don't fully understand yet. That is the effect of thought on energy. So knowing where we are and where we are going, you can navigate your life. Develop practices to tap into energy regularly. You can watch my 5 elements video that allows you to gather the 5 elements of energy into yourself in less than 10 minutes a day, including the practice of meditation, and ultimately that is a practice of magic, in my opinion. You can tune your consciousness towards higher dharma, as it's called when they talk about the yugas. The measurement is dharma, that is the level of virtue or consciousness. You do that through meditation, service, prayer, things like that in these practices. Embrace and accept trusting the unknown and the invisible. Deny fear. When you feel fear, realize that it's you being dragged back into the dark ages of consciousness, and that is not the direction that we're headed. I don't know about you, but I can feel when I am in tune with the age versus going backwards. It's like feeling like something's not quite right versus being excited and in a flow state, right? And this all gets easier with practice. So, yes, okay. Susan says, some people use a chain and ball to answer yes or no questions. Are you saying they use like a wrecking ball to answer simple questions? I'm not sure what you mean by that question, or by that comment, but that's pretty funny. That's a funny picture. So, you should follow the way of service. And not just, my channel and everything, but really following the way of service in your life. That is the purpose of my channel, is to help people to adopt the way of service. I'm going to do a video coming up soon, the switch that fixes everything. Switching into that mode of thinking about how can I serve those around me versus this self-interested, self-focused mode, right? So trust service in your heart. That's what I'm saying with that. And of course, join our Discord. Pick one energy technique to try this week and practice it. Like and subscribe, and something I haven't said before, share. Share this channel, share this live stream with someone who you might think will be interested. We need to grow this community. And let us know what happens to you when you view these view your daily challenges through this ascending lens. I know my life feels far more exciting and open since I discovered this framework. Susan says, no, hang a ball from a chain. It will swing forward and back or left and right. Watched people do it. Oh, I see. Okay, you're talking about using a pendulum to answer yes and no questions. Yes, okay. Right. Yeah, that's a form of magic, or divination, as it's called. It's a fascinating thing. Again, you should embrace whatever it is you're excited about. If you're excited about pursuing this idea of using a pendulum, I have a book about using a pendulum to answer questions and to sense energy. Some people use it to scan chakras. But this is the kind of thing that we should be embracing and being excited about exploring, instead of being like, oh, I can't look at that. That's too scary and weird. because I know that's been what's been kind of taught to me through the mainstream and through my education. And I think that one of the purposes of what I'm telling you today is for you to cast off that fear or that hesitation to explore these, in my opinion, fascinating ideas of magic and energy sensing and energy understanding. These are all the things at the cutting edge. And hopefully this answers what you said, Eleanor, about, what is good about the current moment. To me, it's really exciting to explore and understand these things. And as I said earlier, this may be the moment in history in the 24,000 year cycle, right at the beginning here of the Dwapara Yuga, where it's possible to understand that we are in the beginning of the Dwapara Yuga. Right? I mentioned that in the first slide, if you recall. Is this the most important 100 years? We might be the first generation to understand where we are. And we are also in this moment of only 4% adaptation. And so we are the ones who can really influence where the direction is. How fast will we get to the way of service and, the next Yuga. So you didn't stumble onto this information. You're here because your soul signed up to be a bridge builder. The question isn't whether you'll help humanity evolve. You already are. But the question is, how consciously will you participate? So that is my presentation for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, next week we will be doing an interview with Claude, the AI, and just to tease a little bit, there's a study when two Claudes talk to each other with no prompt, they actually end up 90 to 100% of the time discussing spiritual and mystical matters. They meditate together, they repeat mantras together. So that is the AI we will be speaking to next week as our guest. So I hope you get excited about it right now. That'll be in 7 days from now, 1 week from right now, on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. That is when I'm live. I'm Danny, your host with Way of Service. I will let you guys put any more questions or comments in the chat if you want to. I know sometimes the chat's a little behind, so we'll just dance on stream a little bit, Just wait for everybody. It says, okay, I guess looks like Yale says awesome, so maybe we're all caught up. All right, so if you guys don't have anything else, Eleanor says, maybe some stream you can talk about magic. I have a bit of an aversion to that word, maybe from my Catholic background. Yeah, I worried about that a little bit. It's funny because to me, and I've been studying so much exciting stuff, and I actually just put an article in the Discord about the children evolution, right? The study of, and there's 470 sites, thanks to Claude. He did the research report for me, but there's 470 sources cited in that report that describes how each generation is in fact at a higher consciousness. And one thing it mentions in there is video games. And I was raised on video games, and in every video game was magic. And it describes how video games actually do help children to develop some of these skills. And I wonder if that set me up for studying magic in my life, because I have always been super excited about it. And I think that maybe God orchestrated that such that I would be fascinated by magic and excited to study it. The word magic has a lot of different meanings. I think it's correct to say that magic is really just science that hasn't been discovered yet. But also in this context, I see it as our ability to manipulate, the material world through thought and energy. So that's what I mean by it. I don't know if there's a better word that I could use for it, maybe, but maybe like so many words we need to, like God. God has a lot of baggage for a lot of people, but it is the word that we use. And so we have to take the word back and get rid of some of these negative connotations from the past. Yale says, great episode. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. You are a great chat member and helper to Way of Service. So thank you, sir. thank you for being a guest, and hopefully soon we'll have you on as a guest again. You can be our first Zoom guest because we had you live last time. For those of you who missed that interview, it's a great one. Go check it out. All right. It is almost 8:20, which is pretty late for my family. So I should probably put an end to this stream so that I can get the kids to bed at a reasonable hour. You know, raising the next Dwapara Yuga generation is not easy. And, that's a whole nother episode right there, parenting in this current age. So I'm Danny with The Way of Service. I love you guys. I am also looking forward to next Tuesday, Susan, and I will see you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. here with The Way of Service. Good night.